Hi everyone, another journey, and our guest walked into their first mindfulness class needing peace for their racing mind. As a change management professional rooted in evidence and science, they felt like they might be a bit of hocus-pocus about this whole thing, but they needed to find a solution to settle their scattered brain. So despite their early misgivings, the experience proved profoundly life-changing. I say no more, but we welcome our guest. And I let her say her name because I forgot to ask how does she pronounce her name. But how do you
Well
pronounce your name?
done, David. It's Liezl, like diesel or weasel.
Welcome, Liezl.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
So it's the mindfulness is really the thing that brings me here today because the biggest part of the journey I've had so far has been influenced by mindfulness. Um, I'm originally South African and I currently reside in Scotland for the last 30 years or so. So I've lived here longer than I have in my native South Africa. But the thing that made the biggest difference to my life is probably in the last 7 years when I started learning to be mindful because it made me aware of what's going on. Because mindfulness is just that, it's being aware of what's going on as it's going on without judging it. And until that time, I can very comfortably say I was going on autopilot.
And that's easily done. Going on
Oh,
your
easily done. I mean, we're
because
programmed to do that, right?
yeah,
Hmm.
you do something every day on autopilot and you don't know it. When
Yeah,
you do things in a certain way, you move in a certain way, you respond in a certain way, you talk in a certain way. But that's autopilot. You don't go out there every day to go the same monotone, same way. You go in a different tone to everything.
yeah,
So it is autopilot. And it's
exactly.
about adapting as well.
It's about being able to be aware that you're on autopilot sometimes, being able to be aware that actually there's nothing wrong with autopilot. We need it
Yeah.
because if we had to think about every single step of everything we did every day and break it down to its minute level, we would be exhausted before we've left the house.
Mm,
So autopilot's important. We need to be able to do these things automatically without thinking about them too much. But if that takes over our lives, the really important things go missing and we're unable to make decisions that really, really matter about our lives. And so when I started being able to recognize that stuff, I started having to ask myself some very uncomfortable questions. For example, at the time I was working in change management as a contractor. So because I live in the sticks in Scotland, I'm about 50 miles away from the nearest city. And I had to get on a train. I had to leave the house at 5:30 in the morning to get on a train to go to work. And I'd come back maybe by 6:45 at night if I was lucky. And at that time, I had a small child in the house and I could barely see them. There was hardly enough time for me to actually be there while they were awake during the day.
mm,
And it got to a point where I realized that actually, who am I benefiting with this? Going to the city at stupid o'clock in the morning and coming back at stupid o'clock at night and barely sleeping before I go back. And that's what made me go, a change is required because actually having a child was intentional. I want to be a good parent and I want to be in their life, and I don't get to do that if I'm working for a fat cat in the city. So things changed. Um, I started looking at changing my career entirely. I started thinking about what really matters to me. What do I want to spend my time on? What nourishes me rather than what depletes me? Because I can assure you, the jobs I was doing back then were exciting and fun because they were contracting and new all the time, but they were depleting me. I wasn't sleeping enough. I wasn't taking holidays. Um, there was no such thing as sick leave because as a contractor, you don't get paid when you're sick. And I certainly
yeah.
wasn't seeing any of the milestones of my child. So I needed to start looking at what was important to me. I wanted to be a good parent. I wanted to use my time for something that was worthwhile. And I wanted to be able to put food on the table. That's a fairly important thing, right? It's a very
Yeah.
basic thing you need to be able to look after. So I had to decide very carefully which direction I wanted to go in. And I had no idea. I just knew this wasn't it. I just knew that the next move I was going to make was going to be people-y. It was
Mm.
going to involve working with people somehow. And that's when I started researching and researching, and eventually came upon the idea that actually I might be very well suited to being a counselor, a therapist. And I started my training. And then just before I started my training, COVID hit. Ooh.
Mm. So it's like, ah.
Yeah. So you don't have a job now,
Mm.
and you were gonna go and do that thing, but that thing's not happening either. It was a very uncertain time. As we all know, everything was uncertain for everyone.
Especially when it came in so quickly. And,
Yeah.
I was in America for at least a year, I think it was before it. And yes, I had no job and I was looking actively for a job. And it was the uncertainty of knowing. And then obviously I did find a job and I did have a successful job. But at the same time, I was in a job that was high risk because I was working in a hospital. I was a
Mm,
cleaner and
yeah.
I was
Oh
working
gosh.
around people with COVID, and
Mm,
there's always risks in a job, and
yeah.
it was demanding. So
Do you
yes,
know?
I had the job. I was
Yeah.
pleased I had the job, but
Yeah.
working in a situation that was high stakes, more demanding than I'm not saying it's high stakes, demanding when it's normal, but it was that. It was the added
Mm,
pressure.
mm. And there's risk, right? To any decision or any change that happens to us, whether we've consciously decided to do something different or whether something's happening to us, there's always risk. There's always a payoff, but there's also always a loss of some kind.
Yeah.
And so me taking the leap to finish the last contract and then commit myself to training was a risk I took. So when a pandemic turned up, I mean, nobody could have foreseen that one.
Mm.
Um, it was a risk that I had to be aware of and take. And thankfully, I was able to continue with the training because they started doing it online instead of doing it in person, which was fantastic because it was a 2.5 hour drive to get to Glasgow to go and do the training here. So
And I know
actually,
what,
it saved me.
yeah, I know what Glasgow's like. I've been to
Mm,
Glasgow many times. I think a couple of times. I went to Kilmarnock.
hmm
And Kilmarnock, this was before, everything. So I saw the Glasgow, I saw the Scotland, I saw Kilmarnock, I saw everything. Nice. So if was back in England now, I know for a fact I would go back to Scotland just to see how much has changed.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Glasgow's lovely. It's one of the
But the
most
fact,
welcoming cities you can be in. Thankfully, I could do my training here in this room. Instead of traveling 2.5 hours there, doing the whole day's training and then 2.5 hours back. That saved an awful lot of faff. So I was quite pleased with myself, really. We did have to go eventually when it became safe enough to do so. We went and did some practical stuff in Glasgow. But all of that said, it sounds like it's straightforward, right? Just change your mind about what you're doing, find a new direction, and then go and do the training. Easy peasy. Except in the meantime, said small child was growing at a heck of a rate, um, and starting to find life difficult at school. Um, and it was becoming very obvious that this child of ours, the one and only we had, was different from everybody else. Um, and different doesn't necessarily mean less than or worse than. But unfortunately, in our society, it often is accepted as that. And so that was a hard one to swallow for me. That was difficult for me to try and work out where I stood on this because this was my flipping fantastic child. And yet it just wasn't easy for them to get on at school the way they were. I mean, academically, no problem whatsoever, but physical things like writing, making friends in the playground, being able to be coordinated at PE, that kind of stuff was difficult.
mm,
And I struggled with that idea. So turns out, just as I was about to qualify, that my child was in fact autistic. And I was like, what? Where'd that come from? That's normal, right? I
mm,
mean, all the things she does is just what we do. And it's at that point that I started having a look at myself because I went to a talk about autism because I wanted to try and learn everything I could about autism so that I could support my child. And it was at that time that And the speaker said, now, if you recognize any of these traits in yourself and you are not diagnosed, the fact that your child is diagnosed is a clue. Pay attention. And I was like, I'm not autistic. But I started looking at, because it was obvious there was stuff going on that meant I was different from other people. I always used to just think it was because I was a foreigner, right? I come from South Africa, and therefore
Mm.
my culture is different, and therefore I'm going to stand out like a sore thumb. Um, but there was more to it than that, as I learned as time went on. So throughout this time, as I was learning to be a therapist, I was also learning to get to know myself, and then being able to differentiate how I'm different from other people, and what's just learned behavior and what's actually innate. And that's when I started recognizing that I'm actually an ADHD-er. And the things I've been trying to hide my entire life, the things I've been working so hard at to try and match what other people did, were things I was never going to get wonderful at. I was never going to be able to remember things, if I hadn't put them in a diary. I was never going to be able to organize this, then that stuff after each other automatically. It took me a lot more energy to get all that stuff done. I was losing stuff every time. I was late for appointments. I was missing things. And I just thought that meant I was a crap person. Now, I'm sorry. I've just used a word that may not be okay on your podcast, but I'm sure you can
You
beep
can
it out.
say it. You can say it.
My natural way is much more fruity than that, but let's try and be careful. Um, and so over time, it became clear to me that I'm an ADHD-er. And when I started up my private practice, I didn't want to go into working in the NHS because this is a statistic that might be interesting to the listeners. 50% of newly qualified therapists in the NHS burn out within their first year.
Mhm. I've heard of that statistic.
Yeah. Now that
The
happens.
health service is under, and I'm saying this from what I know and
Mm,
what I can say without getting into trouble. I know the
mm,
NHS is under a big strain, and it has been under
yeah,
a big strain for many years, but
it's enormous.
more so recently.
Yeah. So I knew that I did not want to subject myself to that. Yes, it would be the best training there is. You know, the volume of people I would get to see, the learning I would do in a short time would be enormous. But there wasn't going to be a job in the NHS that was going to fit around my needs, my child's needs, and my location. I wasn't about to move to a city. I live in a place where there's more sheep than people, and I quite like it. Like
Isolation in Scotland, I love it too.
beautiful. Um, so I had to do it myself. I had to set up my own private practice to be able to look after my needs, to be able to keep myself healthy, to be able to say, I won't see people first thing in the morning. I'm not ready. I need time to acclimatize to the day. I also, at the time when my child was still at school, I also needed time to be able to have a gap between getting them on the bus to school and finally settling into work because they were struggling so much at school that anxiety was taking over and they were really having a tough time getting to school in the morning. Um, so having a job anywhere with the NHS or anywhere else would not have worked out for me, which is why I had to make my own to be able to stick to my boundaries of what was important.
Mm.
And actually, it turned out it was the very best decision I could have ever made because eventually we had to take that child out of school. They're home educated now. And they're home educated now because their needs were not complex and severe enough. Now, those are the terms they use at school, in order for them to give her the additional support that she really needed. The things they could offer her were not appropriate. They didn't
Mm.
help. Um, and it got to the point where we recognized that she was a wonderful child. And you know, if she was left to her own devices, if she was allowed to socialize when she needed to, if she was allowed to be on screens when she needed to, if she was allowed to go for a walk when she needed to. But within 2 days of the new term, she couldn't get out of bed again. And we realized that that wasn't a healthy situation, that wasn't sustainable. So we ended up deregistering them. And if I was working for a different organization, there's no way I would have been able to keep my job. There's no way I would have been able to maintain my caseload. as it is, because I look after myself, I was able to make space so that when my child needs to be taken somewhere for a social event for home educators, I can do it.
Mm.
Um, when I know there's going to be a day when there's no way anybody in this house is going to be regulated, I make sure I've got space in the diary and I plan it a month in advance.
And that's
Um,
what I like about podcasts as well, because,
yeah.
if I'm not being derogative in any way about any radio station, but I was part of a
Mm,
radio station. If you had
mm,
show, you had a show that was, once a week, or some people are lucky enough to have 5 shows a week. But the fact was,
mm,
soon you can actually plan in advance, like you said. In advance,
mm,
you can do things. You can have notes in advance. You can have
mm,
things to hand. I haven't got any notes in front of me except for what's on the phone with the email, but
mm,
and you've got the AI, note things so I can look at it if I need to, but I'm not
mm,
using it
mm.
because
Yeah,
I believe it's about you telling me and you've made the time, you're talking to me, you feel
hmm.
comfortable. So that's how it works
Exactly.
for both of it.
Exactly. And you're not distracted by the fact you haven't got notes because you actually have everything you need in front of you
Yeah.
because we planned it like that. If we had to do this live and we couldn't plan it and there were all kinds of other distractions, it would be much harder to be ourselves and be comfortable in this conversation than it is. So
Mm.
yeah, we give ourselves what we need and it's
I feel more relaxed, and
yeah.
I'm saying this in the nicest way possible. When I was part of a radio station,
Mm,
I was told, and this was how it was when I left, they said David used to be shy. David used to be hiding, his face. He wouldn't do
mm,
anything.
mm,
They referred to me over the years, and over the years I was within that radio station, which I'm supportive of, and I believe a lot in them still. They said
mm.
David's gone from this to this, and it was like gone from shy to showing his face, doing things, being positive, and
Yeah.
it's just that recognition. And me doing podcasts now, yes, I started it in the midst of COVID,
Mm,
and I started interviewing, creators, actresses, and then I started interviewing people from London,
mm.
Australia. I felt more comfortable. Yes, I
Yeah.
had a basic setup in the beginning. I used a, you know, iPad,
Yeah.
and I didn't use the earphones. I just used the iPad, and that was it.
Mm. That was it. Yeah.
And
You
then
used
I
what you
went
had
to,
available at the time.
yeah, and I was happy.
Hmm.
Yes, it may have been, and I'll say this loosely, it was crap. But the fact was, and I don't have the early recording, so I can't compare, but I had difficulties with Wi-Fi. I had difficulties with technology being reliable. I
Mm.
was that, but I still went through with it. And
You had to go.
the earliest podcast I do have is audio. So if you look at my list of podcasts, wherever you get them from, most of them are still in audio form, but the newer
Mm,
ones have got video because I found
mm,
resumed video. But the earlier ones that were video,
mm,
I lost,
mm,
but I was able to get the audio still because
mm. Okay.
of a certain technical things. I was able to keep them.
Yeah, yeah, good. So really what you're saying is you did what you could with what you had in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I built from that. I built from that iPad, and then I got a Apple Mac computer, so it was slightly better. And I am a
Mm,
passionate believer of Apple, so I'm not doubting it. And the computer quality was good.
yeah.
And then I had software that was good for me.
Hmm.
And now I'm adjusting to Windows software to record things. And yes, Zoom
Yeah.
was on, you know, for the benefit, but at the same time, it's good now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got getting every software. I got not green screen, but I got that effect of the
Mm,
Northern Lights, which I can change. I got a microphone. I got earphones.
hmm.
I now got a light above me, so it doesn't show so darkly recently. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's all improvement and it takes time, right? You can't start off trying wanting to be perfect on day one. The
yeah,
first client I saw, I'm 100% sure didn't get the kind of value that my clients I see now get. But I wasn't working with people with very difficult changes they want to make at the start. So I wasn't actually, it wasn't costing them anything. And I was doing that through my training. So they were getting the benefit of getting somebody who listened without judgment, but they maybe didn't have somebody who had as much experience or as much awareness of what else they could also be doing to be useful to the client. To how it is now for me, I understand things a lot quicker about people than I did when I started. And the same thing applies to mindfulness, because when I started learning mindfulness, it was all about learning it for me. It was all about trying to get some peace in my head. Because, and here's another thing that's your audience is mostly male, so it won't necessarily apply to them. But hey,
But you
guess
can
what?
say for females because I do for
Yeah,
both.
what I'm thinking is 51% of the population is female, so they're going to find some somewhere. They're going to be associated with some. They've got a mum for sure, and they may have family members or wives or partners. When anytime over the age of 40, women's hormones start changing. And somewhere around about 45 to 47, perimenopause usually strikes. And what that means is that the estrogen hormones that the body has been making reduces. And that in itself is uncomfortable, let's be clear. But for someone who's neurodivergent, because estrogen affects how we process dopamine, if we've been running on being able to make our own dopamine all this time using, ways of keeping ourselves motivated, then that drop in estrogen makes it doubly hard to create the dopamine that we've been able to do so far. And so we become insecure, we become anxious, and we might not be able to sleep very well because of all hormonal changes. And if women are not aware of this happening, they might make it personal. They might go, oh, actually, I'm just losing my touch here. Um, and for neurodivergent women in particular, those changes, those hormonal changes, show up much bigger than they do for neurotypical women, or for neurotypical people with uteruses, right? So we need to be very inclusive here. So if you're not aware of your neurotype by the time perimenopause hits, it's a double whammy, because not only have you got these physical things going on, you've also got some emotional things going on, and your relationships may suffer because of it. Um, and so unless you actually have a full picture of what's going on here, there's no way you can process that
Mm.
properly and go, actually, it's not because I'm rubbish. It's because the time of life I'm at means I've got new demands on me that I wasn't aware of before, and I need to adapt. So at the
Okay.
same time as perimenopause hit, I realized I was a neurodivergent person.
Well, as I always say, and I will say this in the nicest way, because obviously I understand a lot about this,
Mm,
people shouldn't judge, and that's the thing. Whatever your age you are, whatever
yeah.
young or old, you shouldn't be. And this is where people sometimes I feel like go the way they do. It's like they get judgmental on it so
Mm,
quickly because
mm,
they they different. They treat the
yeah.
different. It's like, no, they're still the same person. Yes,
Mhm,
they may be slightly different, but they are
mhm,
still them. They still got the same face. They still got the same hair. They still got the same nose.
yeah. Same human being.
Yeah,
And that's where mindfulness comes in again, right? Because you're saying about judgment. If we're able to recognize what's going on as it's going on without judgment, then there's an awful lot of that pain taken away.
exactly.
It stops us having to judge other people. It stops us having to judge ourselves. We're able to just go, all right, so now I don't sleep very much.
Mm,
That doesn't mean I'm a rubbish person. It just means I need to really look out for how I can look after myself a bit better. Or perhaps I need to go and speak to a GP to try and work out if there's some hormone replacement therapy that would be useful to me. It's not appropriate for everyone, but whether that's the right thing for me to do or not. Um, and it makes a major difference to people who are ADHDers and also perimenopausal if they start taking HRT first before they explore any other kind of medication.
yeah.
Now, I'm not qualified to talk about medication, so I'm going to step right back from that.
But you can give your opinion. That's what I always will
I can
say.
tell you my observations.
Yeah.
Um, Whether or not to take medication as an ADHD is a very personal choice. People need to make that decision for themselves. And you don't just one day go, oh, I'm an ADHD, so I'll take some pills. There's a titration period to go through during which you work out what the right dose is, what the right kind of medication is for you. and whether that works for you, because there's a high proportion of people for whom medication does not work the same as it does for other people. So you can't
Mm.
guarantee it's going to be a save all. And even if that does work out for you, it's really important to recognize that it's just a sort of helping hand. It still doesn't fix your relationships. It still doesn't make you do the things that really matter in your life. It just means you're much more likely to put the washing away.
So going into the future, and obviously I know people will want to ask questions to you
Yeah.
directly, which no doubt you'll be okay with.
Yeah.
But how do you see things going for the future?
For neurodivergent people in general?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's fantastic that there are so many content creators now talking about being neurodivergent. And we have to remember neurodivergence covers a heck of a lot more things than autism and ADHD. Um, and that is really helpful because it means we get to see that being neurodivergent is actually part of a healthy um, ecosystem of people. If you look at all the people in the world and you look at where they fit on whether they're neurotypical or whether they're neurodivergent, it would be a bell graph with the majority of people in the middle of the bell graph being neurotypical, and then us neurodivergent people being more to the edges of that. But as an evolutionary development, it actually works out really well for humankind to have neurodivergent people
Mm.
because ADHD-ers are likely to seek novelty. Where do you think the people, what do you think the people were like who got on boats and sailed off into the blue yonder, having no idea where they were going hundreds of years
Exactly.
ago? Uh, who do you reckon they were? Um,
Mm. Mm. Makes you wonder.
exactly. Who do you think were the people who were able to create new systems and organizations in new places from scratch? You know, the, each neurotype has things that they find easier than other people do. Each neurotype has things they find more difficult than other people do. And it's the same for every human being you put next to another one. They're going to have things that are easy, they're going to have things that are not so easy.
Mm.
So I think as in general, what we're seeing is that people are getting more aware of neurodivergence. There's still a heck of a lot more understanding to be gained, not least for people who are late recognized or late diagnosed, because they're still learning about themselves. And so we can't go around educating the rest of the world until we totally have an idea about ourselves. And that's where mindfulness is really, really helpful because if you're learning to look into your inner world as an observer, you learn to look at your thoughts, your emotions, and your physical sensations in an objective way without getting involved in them, without spiraling emotionally because it's hard. Um, and it's also possible to start recognizing which part of your life really is very good.
Mm.
You're able to recognize that more than, the years you've missed it because of autopilot.
Yeah, and you know, I've come across many neurodivergent people. Like
Mm,
I said before we started recording, I follow, neurodivergent rebel,
mm,
Lyric Coleman. I
yeah,
believe they are at the right age where they are a big advocate for talking about autism because of how long
absolutely.
they've been going through it.
Yeah.
And then I got another one I follow, and I've been following him for about 5 years now, Finding Cooper's Voice.
Hmm. Hmm.
Listened to Cooper's mum, Kate, talk about Cooper's journey. And,
Mm,
she's only got Cooper's autistic, but it's
mm,
just amazing to see the interaction of how she talks about Cooper and how he's now a teenager, I think he is. I think he's 13 recently. And just
mm,
how he's going. And then I got my old college lecturer. So I've got a whole range of people I know who are like neurodivergent in such a way, but
yeah.
I look at it as three different ways because you got young, you got the
Hmm.
middle, which is lyric, and then you got my
Hmm.
college lecturer. And my college
Yeah.
lecturer always had a feeling he was autistic,
Hmm.
and he worked with people with autism. But at the same
Yeah.
time, he never thought much of it. And then he got diagnosed, and he's, he's a big advocate in, I don't know if you could follow him or find him, but look him
Mm.
up, Tigger Pritchard.
Okay. I will. I'll make a wee note here. I'm writing in my remarkable notebook. I totally love this
So
thing.
Tigger as in oh Tigger.
As in not Eeyore.
Yeah.
Pritchard. I will have a look. Thank you. Very useful. And I feel in great company here knowing I'm following Lyric. For goodness sake.
Yeah,
That feels pretty
Lyric
good.
is one of the earlier ones I did, and I'll
Yeah.
make sure I will share the link to that podcast
Please
again
do.
because, Lyric was, like I said, they are young, not young, but, and then they got a husband now, and,
Mm,
you know, their husband is autistic as well.
hmm hmm
And they live in an RV, from what I understand. They go mainly live in one state in America, but
hmm
you know, they are a literal inspiration because of how they talk about and how they
hmm
advocate for autism. And that's what
Yeah.
Tigger does. And
Mm,
that's what, like I said, that's what Kate does for Cooper.
mm,
Cooper is non-verbal, but you
mm,
hear the interaction, you see the love, you see the
mm.
lyrics showing the love for their belief, and
Yeah.
Tigger's belief is just helping others. And so
Yeah.
I just like that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's understanding that each person's life matters
Yeah,
and looking after each person's needs helps us all. Because if you accommodate, if you look out for someone else's needs, you're actually helping a heck of a lot more people than that one person.
yeah.
And
And
in the
when you
same
talk
way,
And when you talk about ADHD,
mm,
sorry to cut you off then, but it's the same
that's
about
fine.
ADHD. But I got some I know, who's got ADHD. Doesn't mean they are different. They're just the same as they are as I know them, and I just support that a
Yeah.
lot.
You just happen to know a different thing about them now that you maybe didn't know before.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So,
we're getting to the very last bit of our conversation, so it feels really
mm,
important for me to mention that the whole idea of me recommending mindfulness as a way for ADHD-ers to support themselves in non-medical ways, you can do it alongside medication, obviously, um, is that the more we learn about ourselves, the more we can support ourselves. And when we give ourselves care and comfort, it's much easier to give it to other people too. So every bit of time and energy that we invest in our own learning um, and acceptance of ourselves has benefits for the whole rest of the world. When I learned to be more mindful, I was able to manage my emotions much better. I was able to come home and be able to deal with parenthood a lot better than I was able to do before that because I was able to see the big picture. I was
mm,
able to see that my frustration that then sometimes bubbled over into emotional dysregulation um, wasn't about what was going on right in front of me. It was about other stuff from the past or about expectations that were nothing to do with what was really going on in front of me. And I wish that for everyone who can possibly learn mindfulness, and that's why this course that starts on the 6th of February is so important because it's adapted specifically for ADHDers. Mindfulness is very often not taught in a way that's accessible to ADHDers. This one's online.
mm,
Um, we'll have several breaks in every session, and every practice is shorter than standard ones would be if you were in a neurotypical style mindfulness course. And everyone there is an ADHD-er. So, people will have similar life experiences to you, and therefore it's easier to feel accepted. It's easier for us to relax in safety and just learn from the experience than it might be if we had to come in with our mask on.
yeah. So you sent the links to me, but can you
Mm.
email them across to me? But can you also say
I
them
will.
for the benefit of the podcast now?
Absolutely. Let me just get the chat up so I don't say it wrong. Okay, so the best one here would probably just to get my website because from there you'll be able to book onto everything and also onto the newsletter. So my website is all the W's Rewire, Rewire, therapy, therapy.co.uk. So that's rewiretherapy.co.uk. If you find it difficult to find that, I am the only Liezl Laidlaw in the whole world So Liezl is spelled Liezl, or mine is anyway. There's loads of different spellings. And Laidlaw is Laidlaw. So you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. All kinds of different ways we can get in touch. But the website's really the best place. So
Okay.
rewiretherapy.co.uk.
Okay. And last ultimate question to end.
Mm.
What short inspiration would you say to people to up their journey?
There's so many quotes coming into my head right now.
It can be your own words. It can be something that you
Yeah.
know.
Do you know there's that quote that says a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. And that is it. If you want to make a change, it does not matter what circumstances you're in right now. There is something you can do, whether it is paying attention to your breathing right now, whether it's something much bigger like signing up for a course or saving up for a big change like moving across the world somewhere else. Setting yourself an intention for what you want and recognizing what the reason is for making that change is what's going to make you have the energy you need to get there. And it's also what's going to lead you there. It's going to tell you what the next step is. It's like having a map of what's next. I knew I wanted to work with people. I knew that mindfulness was important to me, but I didn't know the answer before I started looking and knowing what the end needed to be. So start looking at what it is that matters to you. Set out what your intention is. Recognize why that's important to you and get going. Congratulate yourself every time you do something tiny.
Amazing. Liezl, I'd like to say thank you for sharing your journey of ADHD stroke, talking about neurodivergency on the journey today.
Thank you very much for having me, David.
Thank you.
The Journey podcast explores stories of personal growth, challenges, and life-changing moments. Each episode dives into unique experiences, offering insights and inspiration for listeners navigating their own paths. I believe everyone has a story worth sharing. If you'd like to share your journey with David and others, email your story to wisewords1983@reborn.com, and it may be featured in a future episode.